I never thought one moment could rewrite 5 years of work, but here I am telling strangers on the internet the thing I can't tell anyone in real life. My boss, the CEO of our company, smashed my prototype in front of the client and said, "This is garbage." And the worst part? I didn't say a single word. I just stood there, holding my breath, pretending my ribs weren't shaking. That's where people usually roll their eyes and say, "Why don't you speak up?" Because you don't talk back to a man who thinks he built you. Because you don't argue with the guy whose name is on the glass door, no matter how many hours of your life he's already chewed through. Because when you've invested half a decade into something, you start believing you owe loyalty to the person who signed your paycheck. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing because I still don't know why that moment felt less like humiliation and more like confirmation. Confirmation that the man I'd trusted for too long was exactly who people warned me about. The day started quietly. Too quietly, the kind of quiet where your gut keeps tugging at your sleeve. I'd been up since 4:30 a.m., checking every wire, every sensor, every line of code on the display module. My prototype wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it worked. And it worked because I made it work. 5 years on one idea. One machine. One chance to show the client we weren't just another tech firm selling smoke and PowerPoints. I wasn't nervous about the prototype. I was nervous about him. Our CEO, Max Hartwell, the kind of man who walks into a room and sucks all the oxygen out just to watch people breathe harder. Handsome, tailored, loud in the way only a rich man who's never heard no can be. When he praised you, it felt like sunlight. When he turned on you, it was a winter storm with teeth. And for some reason, he'd been quiet with me the last few weeks. Not angry, not dismissive. Just watching. That was worse. At 9:45 a.m., I rolled the prototype into the presentation hall. We had 20 minutes before the client arrived. My hands were steady. My chest, not so much. Max wasn't there yet. Good. That meant I could breathe. I adjusted the calibration pad, checked the alignment arm, lifted the casing just enough to feel the warmth of the core. It was functioning perfectly. Quiet hum. Stable temperature. No errors. I allowed myself one small smile. The first in weeks. Then the doors opened. The clients came first. 2 executives, a technical advisor, and their CFO. All friendly, all curious. All ready to hear what we could do for them. I shook hands, answered early questions, began the soft intro. Everything felt normal. The normal that comes right before impact. Max arrived 14 minutes late. He didn't make eye contact with me when he walked in. He didn't greet the clients. He went straight to the front of the room, loosened his tie like he was stepping on stage, and clapped his hands once. "Let's see what my star engineers built for us." Star engineer. People think that sounds flattering. In our company, it was the equivalent of a loaded gun pointed at your reputation. I started the demo. Straightforward, clear, careful. The machine responded on cue. A clean run. The client nodded approvingly. For the first time in months, I felt something close to pride, loosening the tension in my shoulders. Then Max stepped forward. "Hold on," he said. "Let me show you something." The tone was wrong. The smile was wrong. The air in the room shifted. Before I could move, he grabbed the prototype with one hand, the casing, not the handle, and lifted it just slightly off balance. It wasn't built to be held that way. Anyone with basic sense would know that. "See, here's the problem," he announced loudly. "Max," I tried quietly. He didn't hear me. Or he did and didn't care. He slammed it down on the presentation table. Hard. The internal stabilizer chirped. A warning beep. Sharp and quick. My stomach dropped. He'd hit it exactly where the sensor housing was most vulnerable. Then before I could reach it, adjust it, protect it, he grabbed the top panel and forcefully twisted. A metallic crack sliced through the room. The clients flinched. The technical advisor visibly winced. My throat closed. Max looked at the bent panel, like it disgusted him. "This," he said, loud enough to bounce off the walls, is garbage. I felt my ears ring. My chest went numb. My fingers curled into my palms, hard enough to leave dents. He'd just destroyed 5 years of my life. Literally, physically, piece by piece. In front of the only people whose opinions actually mattered. I heard myself breathe in. Too slow, too shaky. One of the clients began, Was that supposed to happen? Max didn't even blink. No, he said. But now you see the issue. Our engineer rushed it. Didn't prototype properly, didn't test enough. He's brilliant, but impulsive. He smiled like he'd just delivered a punchline everyone should clap for. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. A scream, a gasp, or just the truth I'd swallowed for years. I reached for the prototype as gently as you'd touch a wounded animal. My hands shook as I set it upright. The sensor cores were misaligned. The armature was bent. The power unit was... I didn't want to check. Not yet. The clients stared at me, not with blame, with confusion, like they were watching something they weren't supposed to see. But Max stood between us, blocking their view of me like I was a problem he needed to hide. We'll rebuild it, he said confidently. We'll get it right. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. That sentence, more than anything else, made something hollow open inside me. He'll take care of it. He'll take credit. He'll take everything. The client team exchanged a look I couldn't read. My heartbeat thudded somewhere behind my ribs, uneven and embarrassed. I felt heat creeping up my neck, that slow, suffocating wave you get when someone tears you open in public. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck to my tongue like wet sand. Max placed a hand on my shoulder, light, friendly, poisonous. We'll talk later, he murmured. And that was the moment. Not when he broke the machine, not when he insulted me, but right then when he pretended to handle me gently. That something inside me finally cracked. But that was just the part everyone saw. What they didn't see was what I'd been preparing in silence for months. Because even on the worst day of my career, I wasn't done yet. When the door finally closed behind the clients, the room didn't empty, it just sagged. Chairs scraped, laptops snapped shut. Some of the sales guys suddenly remembered they had another call. No one looked at me directly. They looked near me, around me, at the broken prototype like it was a body on the floor. Max broke the silence first. Well, he said, clapping his hands once, same way he'd started. That could have gone smoother. Could have gone smoother. The sensor housing was cracked in 3 places. The armature I'd spent months refining was bent like cheap cutlery. The casing was split open. My cable routing was exposed, wires bruised and twisted. You don't just smooth that out. I kept my voice level. It was within tolerances before you... He cut me off with a raised finger. Let's not do this right now. Exactly 3 people were still in the room. Me, Max, and Zoe from sales, who suddenly became deeply fascinated by her calendar invite screen. You took a working prototype, I said quietly, and you slammed it. His jaw flexed just once, like a glitch. Grant, you brought something fragile into a real meeting. If it can't handle a little pressure, it's not ready. There it was, the pivot. He always did that. Turn whatever he'd done into a life lesson for you. It handled pressure fine until you twisted the top panel, like you were opening a jar, I replied. My throat felt dry, but my voice surprised me. It didn't crack. It didn't plead. It just stated a fact. Zoe's eyes flicked up, then down. Max stepped closer. Be careful, he said softly. You're emotional. Emotional people say things they can't take back. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. That was his favorite trick. Keep his tone calm so that if you snapped, you'd look like the crazy one. I stared at the ruined shell between us. I'm not emotional. I'm tired. He hesitated just a beat, then sighed like a disappointed father in a bad drama. Look, we'll regroup. You're brilliant, Grant. You know, I've always said that. You just tunnel visioned. We'll tell them we're revising the design. Give them something better in Q4. We? Him? Always we when he wanted to borrow your backbone. And if they walk? I asked. He shrugged. Then they weren't the right partner. Translation: if this blows up, you're my shield. If it lands, I'm your savior. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. He adjusted his cuffs, glanced at his watch. Take the afternoon. Cool off? Send me your files when you're back. We'll reframe everything, okay? There was a time I would have nodded and thanked him for the chance to fix what he'd broken. That reflex was still there, like phantom pain. I actually felt the word okay try to climb up my throat. It stopped halfway. I'm going to document what happened, I said instead. He blinked. What? The failure mode, I clarified, where the casing cracked, how the impact affected the internal stabilizer. I'm going to write it up, log it in the test system. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. Right. Sure. Of course. He smiled again, too wide. Transparency. Love that. He didn't love that. He loved edit access. I carried what was left of the prototype back to my lab. The hallway felt longer, narrower. People moved aside, giving me space like I was pushing a gurney. A few tried for small talk. I didn't slow down. Behind the closed door of my workspace, the hum of the building dropped away. It was just me, the shattered machine, and the stupid motivational poster someone had left on my desk years ago. Fail fast, learn faster. I set the prototype on the bench as gently as you'd set down a hurt animal. The damage was worse than I'd thought. The sensor cradle was fractured along the mount. The main board had hairline cracks creeping out from the screw posts. It wasn't dead, but it was close. I should have felt heartbreak. Instead, I felt something colder, irritation so sharp it almost felt clean. This wasn't an accident. Max hadn't tripped, bumped it, or misjudged the weight. He'd made a point. He'd staged a scene. He'd used my work as a prop in a show about his authority. The unfairness wasn't subtle anymore. It was fluorescent. I pulled my notebook out of the drawer, not the lab notebook, the other one, the one I kept at home and brought in only when I'd decided, quietly, that I was done trusting verbal agreements. Impact from CO during client demo, I wrote. Uneven downward force applied to top casing. No prior mechanical issues during pre-check. All diagnostics green at 9:40 a.m. Witnesses, client team, 4. Internal, sales, 2. CEO verbally labeled device garbage. It didn't change anything, not yet. But writing it down felt like picking up a piece of myself off the floor. That was the first time in months I did something for me, not for the version of me Max needed. That night, I stopped being the hero in his story. My inbox lit up slowly throughout the afternoon. 11:32 a.m. Max. Great work today, despite the hiccup. Let's sync on messaging. Send me all your slide decks and technical docs. I'll consolidate. 11:47 a.m. HR. Reminder. Annual review next week. Please fill out self-evaluation beforehand. 12:05 p.m. Zoe. Hey, you okay? I stared at Max's email first. Send me all your slide decks and technical docs. He always did that after a big meeting. Pull everything into his folder, reword it, put his name on the front slide. It had annoyed me before. Now it felt like a hand reaching into my chest. I opened the attachment he'd added, a draft follow-up note to the client, ready for him to send from us. In it, the hiccup was framed as a brave leave test that exposed a hidden flaw in our engineer's initial assumption, and Max himself was positioned as the calm leader already guiding the team toward a more robust solution. My initials appeared once in the entire page, misspelled. I closed the document without saving. Then for the first time since I'd started working there, I didn't send him my files. I answered Zoe instead. Yeah. Rough morning, I typed. Thanks for sticking around, she replied almost instantly. I'm sorry. That was brutal. They didn't look convinced, though. About his version, I mean. My fingers paused on the keys. What do you mean? They were asking me questions after you left, she wrote, about stability, development time, redundancies. It felt less, your engineer screwed up, and more, why did your CEO break his own toy in front of us? I stared at that line longer than I should have. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. Did they say anything else? I wrote. She hesitated. I could see it in the gap between the dots typing and the message actually arriving. One of them asked if they could speak to you directly next week. I told them everything goes through Max. Sorry, it wasn't her fault. That was the rule. No direct channels. Everything through him. Through the man who just called my work garbage while snapping it in half like a breadstick. Don't worry about it, I answered. You didn't make the rules. I put my phone face down and looked around the lab. My lab, the only space in the building that actually felt like mine. Whiteboards filled with drafts, shelves lined with parts labeled in my handwriting. Months of iterations, each one a little better, a little smarter, a little closer to what the prototype could be. And somewhere else in the building, Max was already rewriting the story, turning my engineering into his leadership anecdote. He'd dine out on that for months. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late to help him prepare for board meetings, building demos he'd show without once saying my name. The weekends I'd lost rewriting specs because he wanted simpler bullet points for people who'd never see the machine, just the potential revenue line. Every compromise, every swallowed complaint, every time I'd told myself, he's difficult, but he's brilliant. He's intense, but he gets results. Standing there in the harsh lab light, with the broken prototype in front of me, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. He wasn't brilliant. He was loud. There's a difference, and once you see that difference, you can't unsee it. By the time the sun dipped and the office started to empty, I'd logged the test failure in the system. Fact-based, emotionless, time-stamped. No names, just external mechanical stress during live demonstration. I attached pre-demo diagnostics, video from the internal camera showing the impact. It was enough to prove it hadn't failed on its own. I almost left it there. Almost. Then I opened a different folder. One Max didn't know existed. One I'd been quietly curating since the first time I'd watched him present my work as his in a boardroom and call it our little side project. Screenshots, email chains, version history logs, a slow, patient archive of every time he'd shifted credit, edited my name out, or claimed to have personally developed something he'd only seen in the demo review. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet. I just knew I was done pretending it didn't exist. At 7:23 p.m., as I was packing up to go home, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hi, this is Morgan from Kestrel Dynamics," a voice said when I answered. One of the client executives, calm, professional. "Do you have a minute? I was hoping to ask you a few technical questions, off the record." I glanced at the darkened hallway, at the lights still on in Max's corner office at the end. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. "Sure," I said slowly. "I've got time." I didn't realize it yet, but that call was the first crack in a wall Max thought would never fall. Morgan didn't rush. That was the first sign this wasn't some courtesy follow-up. People in her position don't waste time, not unless they're confirming something they already suspect. "I want to understand the failure mode," she said, voice steady. "What exactly happened to the device during impact?" Impact. Not malfunction, not defect. Impact. I sat at my kitchen table, coat still on, lunchbox unopened beside me. The apartment felt too quiet, like the walls were leaning in to hear the answer. "Before we get into details," I said carefully, "does Max know you're calling me?" A pause. Long enough, to be honest. "He knows we wanted clarification," she said. "He doesn't know who we're talking to." That was all I needed. "Okay," I exhaled. "Then I'll be precise." And I told her. Every technical detail, every measurable fact, every piece of the truth Max hoped would stay behind the conference room door. I didn't editorialize, I didn't accuse. I just described the physics of what happened when someone applied a downward torque to the casing off-axis, sufficient to snap the stabilizer bracket. On the other end of the line, I heard the muted scratch of a pen. Then Morgan said quietly, "So the device didn't fail." "No," I replied. "It was broken." Another pause, then a slow, controlled exhale, the kind someone makes when a suspicion becomes a fact. "I appreciate your transparency," she said. "Really? This helps." We hung up 5 minutes later, 5 minutes that detonated everything. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heartbeat thump in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Not fear, not anxiety, anticipation. Around 2 a.m., I got up, went to the closet, and pulled out a heavy black case from the top shelf. Inside was the thing I hadn't shown anyone. Not Max, not the team, not even Zoe. Version 2, my real prototype, the one I'd been building quietly on the side, away from the pressure, away from the deadlines, away from his hands. Better armature, smarter routing, stabilizer redesigned from scratch, the one that worked exactly as I'd dreamed 5 years ago. I didn't bring it to the meeting because I'd been stupid enough to think Max would respect the process. That wouldn't happen again. 2 days passed. Max strutted around the office like nothing had happened. He'd corner people in hallways, telling his version of the story. The brave CEO who exposed a flaw before the client could. He turned the moment he'd smashed my work into a victory lap. I watched him quietly, not with fear, with clarity. On Thursday morning, Zoe rushed into my lab, breathless. "They're here." "Who?" "The client, all four. They requested a private technical review. They asked for you. Directly." My hands froze over the disassembled prototype pieces. "Is Max with them?" "They didn't ask for him." The words hit me like cold water. Not painful. Awakening. I wiped my hands, straightened my shirt, and followed Zoe down the hallway. As we approached the small conference room, she stopped and touched my arm. "Grant, be careful." I nodded once. I already was. Inside, Morgan and her team stood when I entered, a gesture Max never inspired. She motioned to the table. "We wanted to discuss your design in more detail, without interruption. Without interruption, no CEO, no theatrics, no smashing." I set my black case on the table. "This is version 2, I said. "I didn't bring it to the previous demo because it wasn't finalized. It's ready now." The room shifted, 4 professionals leaning in at the exact same angle, curiosity sharper than any boardroom question. I opened the case. Their expressions barely moved, but the air changed. The new prototype sat nestled in its foam padding, symmetrical, clean, humming faintly with a stability the previous one never had. "May we?" Morgan asked. "Of course." I powered it on. Smooth startup tone, no stutter, no drift. I activated the demonstration sequence, the armature gliding with the precision I'd engineered into it. They watched, fascinated, focused. "This," Morgan said after a long moment, "is what we expected to see the first time?" "I know," I replied quietly. "You would have, if it hadn't been touched." She exchanged a look with her CFO. Not anger, not confusion, decision. "Grant," she said, lowering her voice, "has your CEO interfered with your work before?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Silence can be evidence too. The technical advisor cleared his throat. "Would you be willing to provide us with development logs and version history? Strictly confidential. For our due diligence." Due diligence. Corporate language for, "We think the problem is higher up." I didn't hesitate. I pulled out the folder I'd been building for months. Everything was organized, time-stamped, clean. No editorializing, no accusations, just the facts of who did what and who pretended they did. As they read, the room grew colder. "He claimed to have built this sequence?" the advisor asked. "Yes." "He presented this design as his own?" "Yes." "And he blamed you for a failure he caused?" I met Morgan's eyes. "You saw the video in the log." She nodded slowly, lips tightening, the quiet kind of anger that means action. "We'll be in touch," she said finally. "Very soon." When I walked out of the room, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt calm. Too calm. Because deep down, I knew what happened next wouldn't be slow. It would be violent. Quietly violent in the corporate sense. The kind that doesn't raise its voice but rips through the building like pressure snapping steel. By noon, Max had heard something. I could tell from the way he stormed past my lab, phone pressed to his ear, face blotched with the first signs of panic. "Who authorized that meeting?" He snapped into the phone. "What do you mean, they requested him? He doesn't speak to clients without me." I stood at my workbench, tightening a bracket on version 2, pretending not to hear. He slammed his office door so hard the frame rattled. 5 minutes later, I got an email from Exec, urgent. Subject, immediate attendance required. 1 p.m. board call, not optional, not routine, not good for him. I walked into that meeting room with my notebook, my version logs, and the knowledge that Max's world was about to tilt. He arrived 2 minutes late, ironic, given his usual obsession with punctuality when others failed to meet it. He looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in. Then the board members appeared on screen. No greetings, no small talk. "Mr. Hartwell," one of them said, "we've received concerning documentation from Kestrel Dynamics regarding the prototype demonstration." Max tried to smile. It looked painful. "Oh, that?" he said lightly. "A misunderstanding. I've already spoken to—" "Sit," another board member interrupted. He sat, and something in me softened with satisfaction. Not gloating, not revenge, recognition. He finally understood he wasn't the only one allowed to break things. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was clinical, methodical, and devastating. They asked questions he couldn't dodge, because the evidence wasn't my word versus his. It was his actions versus reality. When they asked if the impact in the demo was intentional, he stuttered for the first time in the 3 years I'd worked for him. When they confronted him with the timeline of documents he'd altered, he stopped blinking. When they asked why the client had felt the need to bypass him, his composure cracked like the casing he'd smashed. He kept looking at me, not with authority, with fear. By the end of the call, his voice was just a thin string, holding up the ruins of his ego. "Please," he said to the board chair, let's handle this internally." The chair exhaled. "We will," she said, "starting with your suspension pending investigation." Suspension. He jolted. Effective immediately. He looked at me as if I'd done it to him, but I hadn't. He had. The room emptied around him. People avoided eye contact. He just sat there, staring at the table, hands trembling slightly. He thought I was gone. I wasn't. I walked past him toward the door, didn't stop, didn't gloat, didn't say a word. But as I reached the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt since the first month I worked there. Oxygen. Real, full, unfiltered oxygen filling my lungs. Chaos wasn't coming. It had already begun. Max didn't return to his office after the board call. He walked in there, shut the door, and stayed inside long enough for rumors to start multiplying, like mold. People drifted past his glass wall, pretending not to look. But everyone did. Everyone always looked at him. That was his addiction. By 3 p.m., the HR director and the head of legal showed up. 2 quiet knocks, a short conversation, a folder handed over, and then Max walked out with a face I'd never seen on him before. Empty. Not angry, not calculating, just hollow, like someone had unplugged him. He didn't look at me, not once, and that was the moment I knew it was over. Not for him, for us. The spell, the grip, the version of reality where he held all the air and the rest of us breathed what he allowed. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the entire floor exhaled at the same time. A real audible release of pressure, like a valve finally giving way. I didn't celebrate. I just went back to my lab and kept working. It felt right. Quiet, careful, unglamorous. The opposite of everything he'd built his world on. By the next morning, the official announcement landed. Max Hartwell is stepping down to focus on personal matters. Corporate language for remove his badge, forward his emails, and act like this is peaceful. No one used the word fired, but they didn't need to. People know the difference between walking out with a laptop bag and walking out with a cardboard box. For the next 2 days, I stayed out of the hallway conversations. Did you hear? I knew something was off. He was a genius, but everyone suddenly had a story about seeing through him. That's how offices survive. They rewrite the past as soon as the present shifts. I didn't join in. I wasn't interested in victory laps. On the third day, the board chair called me in. Her office was the opposite of Max's. No ego, no glass trophies, no empty symbolism. Just a desk, some plants, and a woman who'd built her reputation on decisions that didn't need applause. Grant, she said, gesturing for me to sit, we owe you an apology. It landed softly, not performative, not legal, real. We mishandled oversight, she continued. We let someone shield information from us. That won't happen again. I nodded once. Understood. And we'd like you to step in as acting Chief Innovation Officer. My first thought was stupidly practical. Do I even have clean dress shoes? My second thought was honest. I don't want to become him. She must have read something in my expression because she added, We're not asking you to be who he was. We're asking you to be who he wasn't. I sat with that a moment. Then I said, Okay. She smiled. Not wide, just enough to feel like a door opening. You'll have authority over all development, full autonomy, and we want to showcase version 2 at the next board session. Properly this time. Properly. No smashing, no theatrics. Just work. When I left her office, people looked at me differently, not with fear or expectation, with something gentler, relief, maybe, or trust. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. The next week was a blur of setups, paperwork, transition meetings, and 30 questions a day I'd never been asked before. Not because I was the smartest person in the building, I wasn't, but because I was the one who stayed standing after the storm. And then came the moment I didn't expect. Max called, not from the office line, not from his assistant, from a personal number I didn't recognize, but I knew the voice before he finished the first syllable. Grant, he said, we should talk. I let the silence do the talking for me. He cleared his throat. What happened wasn't entirely fair to either of us. I think there's a path where... I hung up before he finished. A minute later, he texted, You'll regret this. I blocked the number, because the difference between him and me was simple. He needed an audience. I needed a door. 2 days later, the board session arrived. A room full of suits, spreadsheets, and people who had spent their entire careers pretending they weren't nervous. I walked in with one thing, version 2. I set it on the table, powered it on, ran the sequence. No theatrics, no speeches. No one touching it but me. Just the low hum of a machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. The room was silent, the good kind of silent, the kind you earn. When the sequence finished, the chair leaned back, folded her hands, and said, Impressive, Mr. Hale. Very impressive. I nodded once. Thank you. Afterward, I didn't linger, didn't soak in praise. I just carried the prototype back to my new office, the one that used to be Max's. The door clicked behind me with a soft, decisive sound. His leftover cologne still hung faintly in the carpet. A glass plaque with his name had already been removed, leaving 4 empty screw holes in the wall. The room felt bigger than it had any right to be. I walked to the desk, massive, unnecessary, intimidating by design, and set version 2 down in the center. Then I pulled up a chair, sat, and watched the machine glow gently in the quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like pressure. It felt like space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space that used to belong to a man who'd mistaken volume for strength. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't proud. I wasn't angry. I was Okay, and that was enough. Around 7 p.m., the building emptied out. The lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. I stayed, not because I had to, because I wanted to see how the room felt without anyone watching. I picked up version 2, placed my hand on the casing and powered it down. The soft click echoed through the office. Then I turned off the lamp, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. No theatrics, no final lines, just a man leaving a workplace that finally felt like his instead of someone else's stage. In the elevator, my reflection looked the same as it always had. Tired, a little rumpled, still carrying too much on his shoulders. But the man standing there wasn't the engineer who'd watched his life's work get smashed to make someone else feel powerful. He was the one who rebuilt it, quietly, patiently, correctly. When the elevator doors slid open onto the lobby, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd already taken everything worth carrying with me.